Losing belly fat specifically tends to be really tricky for a lot of people on their weight loss journey. But when you use these 5 golden rules, it can help you to absolutely break through that plateau. So let's dive into it. My name's Autumn. I'm a certified clinical nutritionist with my master's nutrition human performance. And first things first, we need to differentiate between visceral fat and belly fat. We all will generally use the term belly fat to mean roughly the same thing, but they're actually quite different. So what most people know as belly fat is the fat that's stored in the subcutaneous level of the body, which means that it's going to be stored just below the skin. This type of belly fat is the type that you usually will visually see. It will feel what you expect typical body fat to feel like. So it might feel a little bit squishy, or you might be able to physically grab it. Whereas visceral fat is something entirely different. It still is fat that's stored in the belly area, but visceral fat is stored in the viscera, aka around the organs. So visceral fat will look more like a protruding belly, and you actually don't usually see a lot of the fat that's on the outside when you have a lot of visceral fat. So the belly might feel really hard, but it's protruding, and that's because the fat is stored behind the muscle and within the organs themselves. Visceral fat is much more dangerous for our health than belly fat. In fact, you can have a lot of visceral fat but not appear overweight. This is what in scientific literature they call TOFI, or thin on the outside, fat on the inside. That's a literal scientific term. But that belly fat that's within the body can cause a lot of issues for organs, can make the organs not function as well, can lead to issues like fatty liver or cirrhosis. So the 5 golden rules to help reduce belly fat will be addressing both of these, but it's really specifically addressing the visceral fat because that is the fat that has the most dangerous outcomes. And that first golden rule is to watch out for fructose. Fructose is a type of sugar. It makes up half of just regular table sugar. You have glucose and fructose. Glucose can be readily used throughout the body, whereas fructose needs to be broken down by the liver in order to actually use it. And because of this, when we eat a lot of foods that are really rich in fructose, it can essentially clog up the liver and cause the liver to store that extra fructose as fat on the outside of the liver, aka the visceral fat. So by greatly limiting the amount of fructose that you're eating in a day, it can really help to alleviate that pressure that's on the liver to break that fructose down. So the foods that are going to be the highest in fructose are going to be things like sweetened drinks. That is by far the highest level of fructose that you will have. Think of things like sodas or sweetened coffee, sweetened teas, and then fruit juice will also be high in fructose. And energy drinks, those are really loaded with sugar. Pretty much anything that has a lot of added sugar in it is also going to have a bunch of fructose in there too. Other processed foods are also going to be pretty high in fructose if it has added sugar. So just by avoiding mostly processed or ultra processed foods and sweetened drinks, you're inherently going to be avoiding a lot of that fructose. Okay, the second golden rule is to make sure that you walk more and sit less. A study has found that the more you sit, and in this case they were talking about sitting and watching TV, but that could translate to sitting at a desk or sitting and scrolling through your phone. But the more that you're sitting in general, the more visceral fat that you will accumulate. On the flip side, they also found that the more you exercise, the less visceral fat that you have. But just a morning workout won't cut it. So if you work out in the morning and then you sit the rest of the day, you can actually still get those negative impacts of sitting all day that can result in more of that visceral fat. So morning workout, fantastic. But on top of that, walking throughout the day and breaking up those sedentary moments can really help to contribute to reducing the visceral fat. I like to break it up into at least 3 different parts of the day. So in the morning, going for some type of walk. At lunchtime, preferably after lunch, going for another walk, even if it's just like 5 or 10 minutes, just get my body moving. And then after dinner or before I make dinner, going on an evening walk. But you could also use something like a Fitbit that will remind you to get up every hour and get a minimum of 250 steps in, which really helps to make sure that you're not sitting for longer than an hour at a time. And 250 steps is really only like 2 minutes of walking around. Okay, the third golden rule is to limit alcohol. Alcohol's impact on visceral fat works pretty similarly to fructose because they both have to be broken down by the liver. And if we have a lot of it, it can overload the liver and lead to those visceral fat issues. In fact, when you get fatty liver buildup from non-alcoholic sources, it's known as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. That's going to be more from like the sodas and sweetened drinks. Whereas if you get the fat buildup from alcohol, that's known as alcoholic fatty liver disease. So they work in a very similar fashion, but both have the end result of increasing fat within the viscera. But on top of that, even just from a general weight loss perspective, drinking alcohol is going to really negatively impact that. And it does so through a couple different ways. One is that it really negatively impacts sleep, and poor sleep leads to increased hunger hormone ghrelin the next day. It also leads to increased cravings for sugary, starchy foods. So it sets you up for failure for the next day after you had alcohol the previous night. That poor sleep can also increase the stress hormone cortisol, which tends to cause weight gain specifically around the belly. So overall, limiting alcohol and of course making sure that the alcohol that you do choose is 0 or low sugar is very important when addressing belly fat. So if reducing that visceral or belly fat is a big goal of yours, then really reducing alcohol, preferably to no more than 1 to 3 drinks per week, is a really important golden rule. Okay, the fourth golden rule is stress reduction. As I mentioned, high cortisol has been found in studies to be linked to weight gain around the belly, but it's important to know that we can have stressors in multiple different forms. It's not just the typical type of emotional stress that most of us are familiar with, but it's also physical stress too. When we're looking to reduce stress levels, it's not really to eliminate it, but to balance it, because some level of stress is actually good for our body. We just don't want to overdo it. We want times where we get these little spikes of cortisol, but we also want it to naturally come down and have periods of rest and repair as well. So we all know that emotional stress is one big one, but physical stress is one that I found a lot of people tend to forget about. And that can result in either moving too little or moving too much. Moving too little really brings us back to that earlier golden rule of making sure that we get movement in. So if you're not moving enough, setting a goal of at least 8,300 steps per day, breaking up those walks throughout the day can be a really good first step. Preferably also adding in strength training too. But on the flip side, also making sure that your workouts are balanced. This is something I noticed a lot with people who just really love to exercise, is that they can tend to overdo it. So maybe they're just not having a day off, they're working out every single day, they're running every single day. In order to actually see the benefits of exercise, especially when you're looking at it from strength training or a running perspective, we need to have active rest days off where we're just walking and maybe stretching. For a lot of people, that balance will look like about 2 to 4 days per week of some type of traditional strength training or maybe some cardio. And then the rest of the days, just getting that general movement in with walking and that light type of exercise. Especially if you're a runner, you really want to take note of this. I think it's really easy to just get in the habit of running a lot every single day. And there has been research showing that runners have elevated cortisol levels, that high stress hormone, which is why I've seen with clients of mine who are casual athletes like that, where they're working out frequently, tend to have the goal of reducing belly fat, and they find that it is an area that they just for some reason can't get off, even though they're exercising all the time. And I know there's gonna be somebody in the comments who's like, what about athletes? I see endurance runners all the time. They are so thin. What about the professional basketball players and soccer players? They're all so fit, so lean. And that is true. And that is because athletes understand the importance of recovery. In fact, LeBron James has been noted to have spent over 1.5 million on his health and recovery every single year because he knows it's so important. I don't have a spare 1.5 million to spend. And I think most people don't. So instead, we need to make sure that we're actively adding in those active rest days for our body to rest and recover. So not too much, not too little. We need to find something right in between. Okay, and the fifth golden rule is to eat protein, fat, and fiber. As we've seen, sugar is a really important thing to reduce when we're focused on losing belly fat, especially visceral fat, which means that reducing the cravings for sugar is a really important step. Eating enough high quality sources of protein, fat, and fiber helps to raise our satiety hormones, which shuts off cravings for sugar. Plus, when we eat enough protein, it helps our body to hold onto muscle during that weight loss process so that you don't get that slower metabolism as you're losing weight. And then specifically for whole food sources of fiber like an artichoke or raspberries or cacao nibs, studies have found that diets that are low in fiber lead to a lot more visceral fat than those that are higher in fiber. There's also been studies showing that increased intake of quality protein helps to lower belly fat as well. And quality is what really matters. There's a lot of different sources of protein. For example, peanut butter technically has protein in there, and a lot of people think it's a great source of protein, but it's a very poor quality source of protein. So that you need to make sure that when you are eating protein, fat, and fiber to help achieve a belly fat loss goal, that you are really focused on the quality sources, which I recently did a full video breaking down the best sources of protein. So if you want to check that out, you can find it with this video right here. Also, if you're new to my channel and you love this science-backed information, make sure you subscribe right here. Come out new videos every Tuesday and Thursday. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in my next video.